Okay, welcome everyone to U.S. History 1302. We're going to continue today our lesson about the urbanization of America. And yesterday we kind of talked about the poverty and the squalor in the city. But now what I want to talk to you about is the politics in the city. And something that's pretty important that you need to learn about is the political machine. A political machine. A political machine is an organization that purposefully manipulates politics for personal gain. Okay? They use bribery, they use intimidation, and they use graft and corruption to make themselves rich and make themselves powerful through politics. Okay? So, the wonderful thing about America is that we get to vote for our government. And that's a wonderful thing. It's important and it is precious. And you should always love and cherish democracy. However, if you have ever tried to select a team shirt, excuse me. Yes, sir. Okay, sorry about that. Let's get back right. So, wonderful thing about democracy is that you get to pick who's in charge. But sometimes democracy is not the most effective form of government. For example, if you've ever tried to pick a shirt for like a group, for a team, like let's say, hey, let's pick out shirts for a team, and you don't have any structure and you just try to figure it out, you'll understand that democracy has its flaws, okay? You know, when you let everybody talk and everybody have their own opinion and everything, it can get kind of inefficient. Anyways, in some ways, there are some jobs that a city government does that really probably democracy can sometimes be a problem. For example, the person who fixes the roads in a city or who's in charge of fixing the roads is often called someone like a road commissioner, right? Well, a road commissioner, the qualifications for that job would be knowing how to fix roads and knowing how to manage employees, right? Maybe knowing how to do budget and accounting. Does any of that have anything to do with being a politician? Money. Now, who wins elections? How does a politician get people to vote for them? What do they have to go do? They have to go campaign, right? They got to go around, kiss babies, shake hands. Okay? All right? When you do that, you know, you got to smile, you got to be charismatic, you got to be a great politician. But does being a great politician mean that you're going to be good at fixing the roads? No. And so there are some things that we do in our democracy sometimes that lead to outcomes we don't want. So there are some positions that we vote for that we probably shouldn't vote for. They should probably get appointed. But that's not really the point of a political machine. What a political machine does is uses the mechanisms of politics to make themselves wealthy. You see, the government does a lot of work, okay? Especially in a city, okay? Where you've got transportation that has to be arranged. You've got to have fire services, water services, sewer services, roads, construction, building bridges, building new buildings, building new government offices, etc. Okay? All those jobs cost money. Government gets money through taxes, and it pays for the things that it buys. And that is where the money really starts to get messy. Okay? How does a government decide who's going to build the sewer system for the city of Chicago? How do they decide? What methods should they use? Okay? Well, the right and honorable way that it should be done is this. A city wants to install a new sewer system. So they call 3 or 4 different companies in the area. They let them know that what they want to do. Those companies put together a bid. A bid is like a projected cost. So one company says, we'll install the system for $1 million. We'll install the system for $1.3 million. But all the different companies kind of like show the city what they plan on selling and what they plan on, how much money they plan on charging and kind of what product they're going to give the city. The city council or the city government or the mayor or whoever it is that's in charge, they need to then go through, look at all the bids, pick the one that's going to offer the city the best product at the best price and order it. And that's the way it should work. But that's not always the way it does work, okay? During the Gilded Age, there's not that much regulation on what city government can and cannot do. And there's not that much guidance on what a city government can choose to purchase and what a city government can choose to not purchase. For example, okay, let's say the city wants to build a new road, okay? And Mr. Brown, you're the mayor, okay? Now you're getting ready to decide who's going to get that new road. Who's going to get that new road contract? It's going to be a real hefty contract. It's going to make that contracting company a lot of money. And your cousin, who just so happened to have donated $50,000 to your political campaign last year, he says, hey, bud, I've got a real good deal on this road for you. I got a great bid. And that bid, you look at it, and it's like 3 times more than what it should be. But you're the one who gets to make the decision. So you hire him. He takes all the money, and he doesn't need that much money to build the road. He builds the road on the cheap, and he takes that extra money and he slides it in his back pocket. And then while he's doing it, some of it falls into your pocket too. That's called graft. Okay, it's when you overcharge the government, you siphon off funds. So like instead of buying a hammer for $5 at the hardware store, you go buy a $20 hammer at your brother's hardware store. And that extra $15, you get a few dollars in your back pocket. And it's not your money anyways, it's the city's money. And so you can siphon off money to make yourself wealthy, okay? This system is often called patronage, or the spoil system is related to it, okay? Patronage and the spoil system, they're related to just plain and simple graft, okay? It's where politicians reward their supporters with political jobs, political contracts, okay? And so what would happen in a political machine is you would have a huge organization dedicated to raising money to fund politicians' campaigns and get people to vote certain politicians in. And then when those politicians are in office, they then use their power to make the political machine wealthy. When you hire something for this, when you buy something for the city, you buy it from the political machine. When you hire someone, you hire one of your friends or one of the members of the political machine, etc. And so there's a lot of cushy city jobs. There's a lot of big lucrative contracts that are used to make people rich. And so a lot of cities are just rife with corruption. Corruption is when something is intended for one thing and it gets messed up along the way. And it's twisted and turned into something it's not. Okay? Now, you might be asking yourself, but this is a democracy. How does big businesses and big party leaders get people to vote for obviously slimy mayors and politicians all across the country? Well, you have to understand the way people voted back then. Today, we have this thing called the secret ballot, which is very, very important, okay? The secret ballot is the idea that when you go into the voting booth, no one sees your decision. You vote and you leave, and no one knows. They know that you voted, and they know in total all the votes, but they don't publish that Mr. Brown voted for a Democrat or Mr. Brown voted for a Republican, etc. But that's not the way elections all used to be. Elections used to be much more public affairs. And today, when you go to an election, you either do it on a computer or you get a ballot on paper, and it already has all the candidates filled in for you, and you just kind of check which box you want. The way that they used to vote was that you would actually fill out a ballot. So you would write out, I, Mr. Brown, do vote for George Washington as president and Abraham Lincoln as governor and John F. Kennedy as the mayor, etc. Like you write down all the positions and who you vote for. You take that to the ballot box and you stuff it in the box. What political parties would do is they would make the process simpler by pre-writing ballots. And so they would already write the ballot out for you, who you were going to vote for, and you just had to sign your name on the line. So if you were a Republican, you would go get the Republican ballot. If you were a Democrat, you would go get the Democratic ballot. You'd fill it out, you'd take it in, and you'd drop it into the bucket. But what that meant is that you could usually tell what someone was voting for because they might be on different colored paper. Or it might be obvious, even if you were kind of trying to hide it, it might be obvious, oh, that's a Republican ballot, or oh, that's a Democratic ballot, which made it much more easier to intimidate people to vote a certain way and to bribe people to vote a certain way. A lot of times on election days, a political, let's say there's a factory owner who really wants this one politician in office. He might say, okay, guys, listen up. Today is election day. I'm going to give you half the day off with pay. All you got to do is take this little slip of paper, go put it in that box over there, okay? And so people would do it. And this allowed for a lot of people who didn't really care about politics to become tools of political machines. Political machines would typically bribe the people by like, some of the more famous political machines, like the one in New York called Tammany Hall, the political boss, the guy in charge of the political machine, his name was Boss Tweed or William Tweed. And you know, a lot of people liked William Tweed because every year at Christmas, he made sure that the poor people in his part of town, they had a turkey or they had a ham for Christmas. And they had a bucket of coal to pay for their heating bill at Christmas. And so that was like a nice present. And you're like, hey, that's nice. I'll vote for your people. I don't really care, but I'll take a turkey, And so for a lot of people, especially, and they also took advantage of there were looser laws about how long it took for an immigrant to become a citizen. And there was looser laws about how long it took for an immigrant to be able to vote, things like that. They took advantage of that, the political machines did. And so you have a lot of people that were not very educated, weren't really aware of what was going on in politics, and didn't really care. And so you could just give them something like a turkey, or you could give them a day off, and they would just go take the paper, put it in the bucket. Hey, that's good. Okay, so political machines tended to dominate big cities across the country. And there are political machines that were Democrats, there were political machines that were Republicans. It happened on both sides. And political patronage was a serious problem. It actually ended up killing one of the presidents of the United States. Okay, his name was James Garfield. James Garfield, do you guys remember when I taught you about the Oneidas, the weird religious community in New York? We were talking about the different offshoots, there was the Shakers, the people that separated men and women and everything, and this woman thought that she was Jesus but a female version. Those were the Shakers. Well, the opposite of the Shakers, who separated men and women even if they were married, they couldn't have anything to do with each other, that sort of way. The Oneidas, they were a group that were a weird religious group that basically believed in you can love everyone and being married, and they had complex marriage where everybody in the community was married to each other, and that worked not really well, and it all kind of went apart. But then the Oneidas funded their lifestyles by making silverware, and after they decided to give up the complex marriage thing, they gave up their weird cult, but they kept their silverware company. You can find silverware called Oneida Silverware all across the country. I think I have some too. Anyways, moving on. They make good silverware. The Oneidas, they had this guy in their group called Charles Guiteau. I might be mispronouncing his name. But Charles Guiteau was so weird that the Oneidas kicked him out. Okay, now remember, these are the people that everybody in the community is married to each other. There's 100 of them. There's 100, 200 of them. They're all married to each other. Charles Guiteau was so weird they kicked him out. He was this man that was very obviously mentally disturbed. His name was Charles Guiteau. And he was a fervent Republican. And during this time period, the Republican Party had two factions. We're not going to get into it too much, but there were these two factions. One was called the Stalwarts. One was called the Half-Breeds. Okay? All right? The Stalwarts were very much in favor of keeping old styles of political corruption and patronage. You know, they believe to the victors go the spoils. Politician has a right to appoint anyone they want to political jobs as a way to reward supporters. The half-breeds, they were more in favor of reform and making it so that you had to take like a test and to prove that you were qualified in order to have a political job. Well, Charles Guiteau was like a stalwart of stalwarts. He's like the most stalwart guy ever. He loves stalwartism, okay? And he goes around during the presidential campaign of 1880, when James Garfield is running for president. James Garfield runs in 1880 for president, and Charles Guiteau campaigns for Garfield. Now, he's not actually like a very serious campaigner. He's like on the street, like telling people to vote for James Garfield, okay? He's delusional. But he believed, for all his hard work, that he deserved to get a job from the government. I think he wanted to be like the postmaster of some town. So anyways, when James Garfield becomes president, Charles Guiteau is like, you know, I guess he writes him a letter or whatever. He's like, expects this job to come in from James Garfield to be a postmaster, okay? James Garfield has no idea who Charles Guiteau is. Like, he says no, you know, he doesn't give him the job. And Charles Guiteau is outraged. His hero, James Garfield, the man who is president because of him, denied him a job. Now remember, he's delusional. He thinks that it is directly he is directly responsible for James Garfield winning the president because he was like out on the street, like yelling at people, you know, vote for Garfield. Okay. So anyways, he thinks he deserves a job. And so he's so mad, he shoots President James Garfield and kills him. Okay. James Garfield, like, I believe he suffered for like a few months, I think, from like the wound. It was like he got nasty and infected and killed him. Anyways, so James Garfield died because of a political supporter who wanted a job, didn't get a job. And the patronage system ultimately was reformed because of that. After James Garfield died, Chester Arthur became president. And Chester Arthur, he was actually someone who was for patronage. Like, he thought it wasn't a big deal until the president died. And then he's like, okay, we need to do something about this. And so eventually, in 1881, they passed a law called, I believe, the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which creates a civil service exam and a civil service commission. Today, if you want to work for the government, you have to take typically a civil service exam to show what you're qualified to do for your appointment. So you can't just like give a job out to your cousin unless your cousin is qualified. And the idea is to prevent inexperienced people, like you're in charge of the sewer in Chicago and you were an English teacher and you never worked in sewers before, but your brother is the mayor, so now you got this nice cushy job. Okay, the whole idea behind the civil service exam is to prevent stuff like that because corruption was very much a problem in the cities across America. And it took a president dying before anything really changed, okay? But probably the most infamous of all the political machines was a guy named Tweed, or William Tweed, who was the leader of the political machine called Tammany Hall in New York City. Basically, everything in New York City was under Boss Tweed's control. He decided who got to run for mayor. He decided who was on the city boards and all the different positions. It was him. He was the man holding power behind the curtain. And his money and his influence and his dominance of politics meant that he could basically do whatever he wanted to. But he was very clearly breaking the law and he was taking advantage of people. Political machines are bad. They take money from taxpayers that's supposed to go to fund things to help taxpayers, and they put them in the back pockets of the rich and wealthy that are, manipulating politics for personal gain. Okay? And ordinary people, though, really didn't understand or didn't care. Okay? You can write about political machines in a newspaper document, and you can write about all how bad it is, and you put it in super big detail, and you know what your average, ordinary New York factory worker is going to do with that newspaper? Okay, whatever. He's not going to read it. Read your 5-page essay about why Tammany Hall is a horrible, horrible organization and it's hurting all the people of New York. He's not going to read it. So what actually took Boss Tweed down was not a journalist, but a cartoonist. A cartoonist by the name of Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast was a political cartoonist who could take big political complicated concepts and put them into simple drawings that anybody could understand. Okay? Look at this drawing. The brains. What is this drawing? What do you see here? What is this telling you? Money. Money bags is in control. It's all about the money. The money is in charge. The big people with money, they're in charge. It tells you a lot just by looking at it. Look at this. This is a caricature of William Tweed. It looks like him, but obviously as what? What did he draw William Tweed as? A vulture. What do vultures do? They eat off the carcasses of dead animals. Okay, they're scavengers. Okay, vultures typically we think of as like nice birds. Do you think like, hey, I want a pet vulture? It'd be so cute. No, they're disgusting. We are repulsed by vultures because they're all right dead. Now you may not be able to see it, but these vultures are sitting on the body of a man, and on that man's body is the name New York. Okay, so what is the message of this cartoon? What is Boss Tweed and his little cronies doing? They're feasted on New York. Okay, does this look like a good thing or a bad thing? Bad. Okay, so you don't have to be that smart. You don't even have to be able to read. Okay, you look at this and you say, that guy's bad. Okay, he's doing bad things. And Thomas Nast published cartoon after cartoon after cartoon all about William Tweed, and it actually helped turn public opinion against him. And Thomas Nast is an early example of someone we call a muckraker. We'll talk about them later, hopefully. But a muckraker is a journalist who exposes corruption so that it can be reformed. Okay? Now, eventually, William Tweed gets unpopular, and those people that were just blindly voting for him and his people just because he was bribing them, they start to turn against him. And ultimately, William Tweed is arrested on charges of corruption, and he gets in trouble with the law. He's taken down. Thomas Nast, however, he is remembered in history as one of the most important cartoonists ever. Thomas Nast is part of why Santa Claus is fat. Okay? Thomas Nast was a cartoonist back during the Civil War, and he would draw he drew this really famous cartoon of like Santa Claus visiting Union soldiers, and like he made Santa Claus fat. Before Thomas Nast, it was very common to see Santa Claus as a little skinny guy, like Father Christmas. So you like fat Santa Claus, Thomas Nast is your guy. Also, Thomas Nast is responsible for, he was a really famous cartoonist, and he would make cartoons about Republicans and Democrats, and he would use symbols to represent them. And so he's the guy who decided that the Republican Party were elephants and the Democratic Party were donkeys. So, just guessing from that, can you guess what political party he was from? He's the guy. He would draw Republicans as elephants and Democrats as donkeys. So which political party do you think he supported? Yes, right? Because elephant, big, strong, powerful. Donkeys. What's another word for a donkey? Okay, a jack something, all right, you know. Anyways, those are his thoughts. Also, William Tweed was a Democrat, you know, so kind of rolls in there. But for some reason, Democrats just like accepted it. They're like, yes, we are donkeys. You know, I don't know. Like they just, for some reason, they accepted it, even though it was kind of an insult. But anyway, so political machines were problems. And for some reason, Democrats were okay with it. Now, to fix problems in the city, before the Progressive era, a lot of the work that was done was through charity. And when I talk about the Progressive era, we're going to get to it later, but it's a period of time where the government starts getting more and more involved in fixing social problems. But before the government got involved, there were private organizations that tried to change things, okay? And there's two concepts you need to know about: the social gospel and settlement houses, okay? The social gospel was a movement among Christians in America to basically do what the Bible says, okay? The Bible says to love your neighbor. Okay, the Bible has commands to take care of people. You know, if someone's hungry, you feed them. If they're thirsty, you give them water. Okay? You're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. And so the social gospel is literally doing that. Okay? Christians across America work to provide charity to those that were poor. And this is a movement that, you know, obviously charities existed for a long time, but there's a renewed emphasis and commitment to charity, and churches and other religious organizations start doing more and more work to help out people in the poor, who are poor. This may not be from the exact same time, but like an example is think about like the Salvation Army. Yeah, the Salvation Army is a religious organization. They do stuff like they help out with medical work. They help out people who are in poverty. If you go to like a Salvation Army store, it's kind of like going to Goodwill, you know, where there's like people donate stuff and then people can buy it for cheap, etc. And there's a lot of charity organizations even today that are religiously based. And in fact, that's like a large number of them. I hesitate to say majority, but I would say probably the majority of charity work is done by churches. And it's out of that, you know, religious conviction that the Lord has blessed you, you need to bless others. That was what Andrew Carnegie said with his gospel of wealth. Andrew Carnegie believed that people who are wealthy should use their wealth to help others because God made them wealthy for a reason. And it wasn't just so that they could enjoy it themselves, but that they could give it to others. You can't take it with you, so you might as well give it away before you die. Now, settlement houses were similarly motivated, okay? And some of them were more religiously explicit and some of them maybe weren't. But a settlement house was an idea that came about because of a lady named Jane Addams. Jane Addams, but her last name has 2 D's in it, okay? Jane Addams, not to be confused with John Adams' wife, okay, who has 1 D in her name. But Jane Addams is an important figure in American history. She was involved in the settlement house movement. She actually created one of the first settlement houses in America called the Hull House. And there were settlement houses in like England and other places. And the idea behind the settlement house is it's a place for people who are poor and need help to come and get help, okay? So it would provide some homeless shelter sort of activities, but it wasn't supposed to be a permanent homeless shelter. The idea behind a settlement house was it was a place for people who were down on their luck to come and get back on their feet again. So they would do things like provide English language classes for immigrants, where they would help teach immigrants who come to the country who didn't know how to speak English, who were, you know, struggling to get by. They could come and get free English classes, okay? They would do classes for young mothers to like learn, you know, childcare techniques and how to like take care of their children. They would help provide childcare. They would help provide food to people that were hungry. They did all sorts of different charity work within the settlement house itself. So it was like a place where you could go to get help when you needed it. Kind of like a Boys and Girls Club today, or like a YMCA club, where it's like a place where, you know, like Boys and Girls Club is a really good charity organization where, you know, there's a gap between the end of school and when a lot of kids' parents come home from work. So what do you do from like 4 to 7? You know, well, kids can go to the Boys and Girls Club. They can, you know, get some more education. They can, you know, have some fun activities. They can get food. They can get taken care of. And that's like something that is today kind of like the settlement houses. But the settlement houses, these were typically private charity organizations, and they were popular all across the country in big cities. And there were places where you could go, like say you needed help finding a job. You would go get help like learning skills and figuring out how to go apply for a job, how to get a job, etc. And these were privately done, okay? Today, there's a lot of government organizations that fulfill the roles of the settlement houses, but that was a way to do it before you get all, you know, the government involved and everything like that, okay? All right. Another thing that happens in the city is leisure and entertainment. Let's say that you're not living in the slums. Let's say you're in the middle part of America, okay, where you've got a job. It's a hard job, but you do get some time off and you have time to do things. Like on the farm, you never have time off. There's always something to do. Now, you don't always have to rush, and sometimes they're easier than others. But in the city, when you're off work, you're off work. And so you may not have a whole lot of time off work, but you're off. And so there's opportunities for people to figure out ways to pass the time, ways to have fun and leisure. Okay, so you see an increase in shopping in the city, and this is more for the wealthy. You see the growth of like this middle class where, not everybody is a grunt in the factory. There's some people that might own a store or operate a store or be like middle managers, or there's jobs for people like lawyers and doctors, not necessarily the big super wealthy mega millionaire businesses, but there's this growing middle class, the accountants, the professionals, and they have more disposable income. And a lot of times, like the mark of someone being in the middle class is like, they're not living in a mansion, obviously, but only the man has to work, okay? And so his wife, has time and opportunities to, to read, to join little social clubs or, join a book club, et cetera, which is where a lot of the early women's suffrage movement gets a lot of their help and pushes from these like women in middle class families who have more time on their hands to do things like join the social movement, okay, or to go shopping. And in the city where there's more people, there are more options for shopping, and that's still true today, okay? There are some stores that you can't find unless you go to a really big city, but when you get to a real big city, there's all these different variety of weird specific stores, okay? So there's an increased access to goods and an increased access to things that you don't need, okay? And what you start to see a lot of is this concept called conspicuous consumption, which is when you spend money just so that people know that you're spending money. You feel better about yourself and say, oh, look how rich I am. I bought all this stuff. The modern day term is called flexing, okay? Or the newest one I've heard is called drip, okay? Doesn't make any sense. It sounds gross, to be honest. Normally when things drip, it's a bad thing, okay? When you have drip, that's just like wipe it off, okay? Just wipe it off, okay? But anyways, when you have something real fancy and you're wearing it, you don't need a Gucci shirt, okay? You don't need one. Any other shirt's just good enough. At a certain point, you're spending money just to show off. But people have always been like that. And same thing happens back then. Now, we talked about sports and vaudeville actually last week. I got ahead of myself last week and I showed y'all like that vaudeville video and I kind of explained it to you. But a lot of people in their free time, they turn to spectating activities. Spectator sports and professional sports teams, they become popular during the Gilded Age. You actually have large crowds of people who have time off and they have disposable income. And they can go and spend an afternoon watching a baseball game, buying some popcorn, and spending the day doing that. And that allows for jobs for people who are really good at baseball just to play baseball. You see early football, you see baseball, you see eventually basketball. Basketball is kind of a late bloomer, but you see a lot of the big sports that we play today gain massive popularity during the Gilded Age, okay? Now, vaudeville is a precursor to the movie theater. Okay, and it's like a theater show where you typically see lots of different acts, like the hurly-burly extravaganza and refined vaudeville. It was basically a style of entertainment where you would have a variety of different shows within one theater, and you would go and you'd spend like hours having entertainment where you might, there might be a sword swallower, and then there might be a juggler, and then there might be a comedian, and then there might be a short play, and then there might be a musical act, and there might be another play, and you could spend hours and hours at the vaudeville show, have a good time, spend your time away. And these are ways that people got through life in the factory, okay? People are the same way. Everybody's working for the weekend, even today, all right? You have a job, it's boring, you're constantly working, but on Friday, when you get off, you're gonna go to the vaudeville show. And that's a way to make life fun. And that's the thing about people even today. We find the little things to help us keep going, even through times that are not so fun or times that are pretty tough. All right, time to talk about women. You guys ready to talk about women? I'm gonna teach you everything you need to know about women in the Gilded Age. Okay, all right. Specifically, you need to understand a phrase called Victorian. For some reason, even in America, we still haven't quite broken off from Great Britain. Great Britain still has some cultural influence on us. And a lot of times when people refer to time periods of the past, they'll refer to it based off of the monarch at the time. So Queen Victoria of England was one of the longest lived rulers of England. And she was basically queen around the same time as the Gilded Age, okay? So in America, what we call the Gilded Age, in England, a lot of times they call this the Victorian era, okay? And in the Victorian era, there are values, especially among the middle and upper classes of society, that are starting to be put under pressure due to urbanization, okay? This is like see, people who want to consider themselves wealthy always try to imitate the culture of the wealthy, okay? All right, so the people in the upper class, everybody wants to be like them, okay? All right, that's how you can feel fancy, to have the stuff that the fancy people have. And so, even though we're in the year like 1890 or so, right around now, I'm just kind of vaguely throwing out a number, 1902, 1894, whatever, those years, people are still kind of thinking about life, trying to live like those old kings and queens and knights and nobles and ladies, okay? All right, and the old manners of chivalry are not really working anymore in the city, okay? The Victorian values about gender and sex are very much separated into spheres. There is the man's sphere and the women's sphere, and never the twain shall meet, okay, except for in very, very special circumstances. So the man is supposed to be the provider, like the knight, out there defending the family. He rides out of the castle, he fights the bad guys, he comes back to his castle. Or in modern times, the man goes off to work, he makes the money, he makes the business deals, he takes care of the family politics, he's the one that votes on behalf of the family, etc. Okay? The woman, her sphere is the home. Like the noble lady of the court, she takes care of the castle. She watches over, all the goings on of the castle. Or in modern times, she takes care of the home. She raises the children. She sees to their education. She's nurturing, and she takes care of the home. And that is the gender roles of the time, okay? Another thing at that time is that it's very, very much focused on modesty, okay? Very, very modest, okay? Public displays of affection or putting yourself out there to attract a mate are not considered, those are taboo. Now it's stricter on women. There's a double standard, okay? For men being, dashing, whatever, that's more acceptable. But for a woman, being flirtatious is a bad thing, okay? Floozy, okay? Right? You don't want to be that, right? Or hussy or whatever. You don't want to put yourself out there, ladies, and be too flirtatious, because then, they're going to think, oh, well, you're one of those. Okay, it's a double standard. For example, some of the really rich houses would have 2 living rooms, okay? So that when you have a social gathering, the men, they'd go to their parlor and they'd smoke and talk about business or whatever. And then there'd be the ladies' parlor where the ladies would sit down in their nice big dresses and petticoats and talk about women things. I don't know. Anyways, but that's the idea. These were very separate. But the city puts that under strain, okay? Living in a city, working in factories, you see more and more women move out of that homemaker role and into the factory. And if you think about rural people, in rural people, those spheres are still there, but less, less fancy, okay? The man is out plowing the field, the woman is at home taking care of the garden and the kids, okay? But when you move into a city, there's no garden, okay? The kids are also probably working in the factory, so the woman's working in the factory too, and she's getting income too. And that is messing up the spheres, because the man's supposed to be going out and getting the income. And now women are getting income too, and there's an increasing number of women, and we're not at the 1920s, we're not at flappers yet, but you start to see women change some of their attitudes about dress, about culture, and about their lifestyles. You start to see a growing number of women who have a separate income from a man who may not be married and are living unmarried in the cities working, okay? And the changes in society are reflected in the changes in dress, okay? And so I give to you the Gibson girl. This is the Gibson girl. This is like the ideal of feminine beauty in the 1890s, okay? All right, like this is like the model on the magazines at the grocery store, okay? This is that. This is the Gibson girl, okay? Now, let's figure out what is different about the Gibson girl because of the Industrial Revolution. What has changed in her? What do you notice about her hair? It's up. Yes. Okay, girls, when you're about to do some work, what do you do with your hair?
Put it up.
Put it up because you don't want to get in the way. It's still long though, but you're working in a factory. You don't want your hair chopped off. Also, short sleeves because you don't want it caught. You start to see less and less like unnecessary clothing or big poofy dresses because in the factory, that's not going to work. That's going to get caught and you're probably going to get an arm ripped off. So you see these women, they're wearing tighter fitting clothes, they're revealing more skin, but they're adjusting to life in the factory. So that's like not quite at the flappers where they're chopping their hair off and wearing short skirts, but it's transitioning, okay? So next week, hopefully we'll talk about temperance real quick and then we'll move on. By the way, Monday, we're gonna be ready to lecture, okay? All right, y'all have a great day. Do good things, be good people, make good choices, and I'll see you